Penguin Random House Audio presents No Walls and the Recurring Dream, a memoir. This is the author, Ani DiFranco. Introducing... I remember being on stage once in a tight little dress, the bottom of which kept riding up my thighs all the way to my crotch as I moved around and sang. Why was it doing this? My face growing hotter and hotter as I tried to hide behind my guitar. I remember once walking out in New York City to get some kind of queer award and getting booed for not being queer enough before I even reached the podium. I remember seeing something warpy and reflective from stage. It was in Amsterdam, and saying on the mic, "What the fuck is that?" Only to walk over and see it was a young woman in the audience living with such severe palsy that she had to lie back in a special wheelchair with an elaborate series of mirrors in which to see the world beyond her knees. In other words, I've had many experiences of being on stage and wanting to die or disappear. I've had many experiences of being trapped in spotlights and time suddenly slowing way down. The sound of my own blood pounding in my ears taking over from some distant sonic background in which angry words are being flung at me from a deep darkness. Somehow, this was worse. It was not just crying, but sobbing. It was Carnegie Hall, spring of 2002, and the sobbing from the third balcony was getting louder and louder until it began echoing around the room. Plus, she was not even the only one crying. A moment of paralyzing trepidation came over me, and I heard my voice falter and begin to move into a distant slow motion. It was the culmination of so many recent moments of paralyzing trepidation, having been in Manhattan on 9/11 months earlier, and having breathed in the acrid blue smoke of the towers, having hit the road mere weeks afterwards when everyone else was canceling their tours and staying home behind closed shutters. I traveled around a country in a state of emergency. I played to half-empty houses that took months to slowly fill up again. I felt all the while a great pressure to lift up the small audiences that were brave enough to come out, a pressure to make sense of it all, to make hope happen. I was confronted nightly with an impossible task. How am I supposed to make a whole show filled with all kinds of songs about all kinds of things when there is just one big thing pressing down on all of us? How could I possibly sing or talk about anything other than the all-encompassing panic in the air or the ominous march to war? And even if I could magically, suddenly make a whole show around this one looming thing, what the hell would I say? It was a challenging time to be a folk singer, at least if you take your job seriously. The message that it was unpatriotic to criticize the president and his "just go shopping while we bomb the shit out of 'em" rhetoric was everywhere, even from people and sources where you wouldn't expect it. It was weird watching what fear did to people. Unnerving numbers fell into lockstep. I tried to make myself into a lightning rod for critical thinking and accountability. I studied, and I made notes, and I got my facts straight. I stayed up debating and discussing late into the night with the most politically astute of my friends. I consulted trusted sources like Noam Chomsky and The Nation for guidance in sorting through the mainstream media quagmire. I traveled around the country and I talked to people everywhere I went. I wrote, and I wrote, and I wrote, and I wrote. On each stage, I unfolded a different permutation of a poem that came to be called Self-Evident. I attempted to engage people directly with this poem in real time. But now here I was, laying a poem about 9/11 down on the very people who had shouldered the brunt of the violence, the brunt of the loss. It was Carnegie Hall. It was only 7 months later, and I was alone on stage when the question of, how can I possibly talk about anything but this right now, suddenly wheeled around and became, how dare you talk about this right now? It was too late. I was trapped again. The spotlight was on me, and there was no time to rethink my decision. I heard my voice finish reciting the poem. I think it may have even sung a few more songs. Then I was back in a dressing room full of smelly lilies and roses, and there were pats on the back and congratulations, you just played Carnegie Hall hugs. Time inexplicably kept going. I will never know what is the right balance in art between painful truths and painful silences. There is no right balance to be known. It's a question to be asked of every moment, and its answer pertains only to that moment and no other. It's the spontaneous deal we strike with others, the conversation or lack thereof. Having played my part every which way, I'm not even sure what I'd recommend. I just know that we need to be willing to make mistakes. I know that we need to allow for our differences. I know we need to forgive each other. I've managed to transcend my own trepidation many times, and I've lifted whole groups of people up with me, and, of course, I've also failed miserably. I've caught glimpses along the way of something very powerful, and I'm not sure I can tell you what it is, but if you give me a chance, maybe whatever it is will show itself. Which brings me back to that night in the mid-90s. I was quite young at the time, when that god-awful dress kept riding up my ass. It took me about 4 songs before I decided that the only thing to do was to take the dress off. There was no fixing of the problem, only the conquering of fear. Get ready. The truth is too valuable to put safety first. Get set. No amount of exposure is unbearable unless you let it be. Go. If you get caught with your pants down, take 'em off. Self-evident. Yes, us people are just poems. We're 90% metaphor with a leanness of meaning approaching hyperdistillation. And once upon a time, we were moonshine, rushing down the throat of a giraffe. Yes, rushing down the long hallway, despite what the PA announcement says. Yes, rushing down the long hall, down the long stairs, in a building so tall that it will always be there. Yes, it's part of a pair, there on the bow of Noah's Ark, the most prestigious couple just kicking back parked against a perfectly blue sky. On a morning beatific in its Indian summer breeze, on the day that America fell to its knees after strutting around for a century without saying thank you or please. The shock was subsonic, and the smoke was deafening between the setup and the punchline, 'cause we were all on time for work that day. We all boarded that plane for to fly. And then while the fires were raging, we all climbed up on the windowsill, and then we all held hands and jumped into the sky. And every burro looked up when it heard the first blast, and then every dumb action movie was summarily surpassed, and the exodus uptown by foot and motor car looked more like war than anything I've seen so far. So far. So far. So fierce and ingenious, a poetic specter so far gone that every jackass newscaster was struck dumb and stumbling over, "Oh my God," and "This is unbelievable," and on, and I'll tell you what, while we're at it, you can keep the Pentagon, keep the propaganda, keep each and every TV that's been trying to convince me to participate in some prep school punk's plan to perpetuate retribution. Perpetuate retribution, even as the blue toxic smoke of our lesson in retribution is still hanging in the air, and there's ash on our shoes, and there's ash in our hair, and there's a fine silt on every mantle from Hell's Kitchen to Brooklyn, and the streets are full of stories, sudden twists and near misses, and soon every open bar is crammed to the rafters with tales of narrowly averted disasters, and the whiskey is flowing like never before, as all over the country folks just shake their heads and pour. So here's a toast to all the folks that live in Palestine, Afghanistan.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?